Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. This is a new series that we're starting, and the series is called Mourning Is Rebuilding. It's a three-part series. Today we're going to primarily talk about the concept of why we have to mourn, what we're supposed to gain out of mourning, and hopefully the other two classes will go more into the concept of the 3 weeks, Tisha B'Av, lessons that we're supposed to learn from those experiences, and delve more into the Tisha B'Av experience when the next couple of weeks, the next week and the following week. But today, primarily, I want to talk about more the idea of mourning and what does mourning have to, what's the beneficial of mourning and why do we have to mourn. So I'm going to start off with a very famous very famous passage in the Talmud, two passages in the Talmud. One is in the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, and Tractate Yoma, and the other one is in the Babylonian Talmud, that's in Tractate Tainus. And the statement goes like this. One of them says, every generation in which the temple is not rebuilt is to be regarded as responsible for its destruction. Right? If the temple is not rebuilt in our generation, can you imagine? It is as if we destroyed it. We're 2,500 years later, and since the temple's not been rebuilt in our generation, there's still time, guys. You know, we still have 2.5 weeks left, right? But, you know, if it's not rebuilt, it's as if we destroyed it. What does that mean? What does that mean exactly? Well, we didn't destroy it. That's statement number one. We're going to have to answer that. Statement number two, it is that the Talmud says in Tractate, in the Babylonian Talmud, whoever mourns over Jerusalem will merit in sharing her joy, the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And so whoever mourns over Jerusalem will merit to be able to see the rebuilding of Jerusalem. That's a beautiful thing. That's a great thing. So the question over here is, what does that mean? Right? Why, if I mourn over it, am I going to be able to merit to see it? You know, what's the connection between the two? So you could say it's sort of like a reward, right? Some say that if you mourn over it, then it's a reward that you get to see it, right? You did what you had to do. God says. Okay, I think I was frozen there for a little bit. I'm sorry, guys. So some say, as we said, some say it's a reward. Now, that it's possible. But we're going to take a deeper understanding of what that means. So, yeah, sorry, everything froze for a minute. Thank you, Kyla. So let's take a deeper understanding. Now, to really understand what this means, right? So the commentaries explain that really the two statements complement each other, really fill each other in. The one hand, it's looking at it sort of from the negative perspective. If you don't do, just like we have in the mitzvot, we have the negative commandments and we have the positive commandments. Right? So if you don't do this, if it's not rebuilt, right, then it's as if you destroyed it, sort of a punishment. And if it is rebuilt, and if you mourn over it, right, so then you'll see the reward will be that you'll be able to share in her joy. Now, it doesn't say if it's rebuilt in your generation. It says if you mourn over it. So if the two things are supposed to complement each other, what does that mean exactly? One is saying that if it's not rebuilt, so that means to say the opposite should be that if it is rebuilt, right? And the other one that says if you just mourn means to say that if you don't mourn. So why does it have to say if it's not rebuilt? So how do the two things work together? And the commentaries say they do. They complement each other. So how do the two things work together? So the commentaries explain that if the temple is not rebuilt, and again, some do take it very literal, right? But the commentaries say if the temple is not rebuilt in our generation, that doesn't mean to say necessarily, right, that you're considered like as if you destroyed the temple yourself. As we said, we didn't. It's 2,500 years later. Right? So what is it bringing out? So it's bringing out a sharp idea of why the concept of mourning. if you don't mourn over the temple, then it as if the temple is being redestroyed again, because there's no purpose for the mourning. There's no purpose for the destruction because you're not mourning over it. So meaning to say the destruction creates a mourning, and we're supposed to mourn. We're supposed to misavel. We're supposed to mourn over the temple. If we're not mourning over the temple, so then the destruction of the temple is for nada, is not for the right reason. And therefore, it's as if we're redestructing again. As if we're destroying the temple again, means to say because we're not helping the building of the temple. Because when we mourn, then we're helping the building of the temple. And that's what it says. If you mourn over the temple, then you'll be able to see the joy when the temple is rebuilt. Not necessarily will it rebuilt in this year, but by mourning, you're fulfilling the purpose of the destruction. And when the purpose of something's fulfilled, then eventually it could get to the next stage, right? Just an example of playing video games, growing in your job, or whatever it is that you're doing, you have to finish that level, right? If you don't finish that level, then you can never get to the next level. If you didn't finish all your different tasks, right, for this job or for this stage that you are in the company, then you'll never go to the next task, to the next level. You never get new tasks. So the mourning misavel, is part and parcel of the destruction. There was a destruction in order for us to mourn. There was a destruction in order for us to mourn. So if we don't mourn, so that means to say that the destruction was for nada, because we're not going ahead and mourning. And if we do mourn, that means to say that we're fulfilling it and we're building it up. We're allowing the fulfillment of the destruction to be complete. Now, when is that going to be complete? That's up to the one above. Hopefully soon. Hopefully very soon. But we're helping it to be fulfilled. And then, right? And then we are going ahead, and eventually we're helping us get to the next stage where the temple will be rebuilt. And therefore, it's as if we are really rebuilding the temple. So that's how the two things complement each other. That's how the two statements complement each other. But what does it tell us? And this is really the point I want to bring out, right? What is it telling us? It's telling us that the misavel, the mourning process, is part and parcel of the purpose of the destruction, right? It's part and parcel of the purpose of the destruction. That is, the mourning process is part and parcel of that. The question is why? What's the purpose of that? Why is it that the mourning process is part and parcel of the destruction? What are we supposed to learn from that? What are we supposed to gain from that? Right? That is a new insight that I think, right, of reflecting and realizing what's really the mourning, the concept of the mourning. So I want to start this. This is an introduction, right? I want to start this with a fascinating story. Right, some of you might have heard the story. There's a couple of different versions of the story. Right, I don't know. I've seen it written in some very reliable svarim, even Jewish books. And the story goes like this: that Napoleon, the ruler of France, right, was once passing by the entrance to a synagogue on Tisha B'Av. Now, the place I've seen it this year was in Paris. Another place I've seen it was in Poland when he was conquering Poland and fighting against Russia, right? And he happened to pass by a Jewish synagogue. He wanted to know where they weren't they celebrating, right? And they told him that it's their day of mourning. It's Tisha B'Av. However way the story is, right? If it was in Paris or it was in Poland and wherever it was, right? The story goes like this. The Napoleon asks, why are they mourning? What's going on? What are they doing? Why are they crying? Why are they sitting on the floor and fasting? What are they doing? So they told him, he said, Napoleon said, you have to understand, today is the day that their temple was destroyed and their land was destroyed and they were exiled. He said, really? When did this happen? I'm a historian. I don't remember this happening, right? He said, this happened about 2,000 years ago. And he said, really? And they're still mourning? He said a statement like this. he was quoted as saying, "I swear that in the end, this nation will enjoy goodness in their own land. For where do we find another nation in the world that preserves its mourning and its aspiration for thousands of years and is not diminished?" So this gives us a little insight, right? And the way I heard it was slightly different. He said, a nation that mourns over the destruction of something for 2,000 years and will never be removed from that homeland, and eventually will return. So a similar idea. But what do we see? We see that God in his ultimate wisdom knew the way, workings of man, because he created it, and made us realize that by mourning, by misavel, we are reconnecting to something that, yes, happened thousands of years ago. But what we're really doing is we're staying the course of who we're supposed to be. We're staying the course of who we're supposed to be. Because when we go ahead and we mourn, if it's for a loved one, if it's for the temple, right? If it's for whatever it is that one is mourning, and whatever it is that one is mourning, right? A severe mourning or a more light loss of a job, whatever. It's connecting you. It's making you realize that you had something better. You had something better, and therefore the state that you're in right now is not really the best thing. There's a very famous story that is said, and I actually said this once in a sermon, right? When I was giving the sermon when our fish was out of town, right? A very famous story that is said that during the 6-day war, right? The Israeli army captured Yerushalayim, the other half of Yerushalayim, the Kotel. They captured the Kotel. It was an unbelievable experience, right? People that lived during that time, right? And especially the soldiers that burst through the walls of Jerusalem, and they ran and they got to the Kotel. And there's a very famous picture of them dancing there, and some soldiers against the wall. And the story is told of it. One of the soldiers started weeping, right? Right? And a lot of the soldiers were weeping and kissing the Kotel. But one of them was weeping, and another soldier, a friend of his, went over to him and said, "Listen, Chaver, my friend," says, "nothing against you, but I know that you're a chiloni shebichaloni. You don't believe in anything. You don't believe in God, right? You're an atheist, right? You grew up with no connection to Judaism at all, right? You're a Jew and you're proud of it, but nothing spiritual, nothing religious. I don't hold it against you, but why are you crying over here? What does this have anything to do with you? And we're celebrating the Kotel, which means to say we're celebrating something that has some kind of spiritual. This is another wall." And he told him like this. He said, "Lama ta bocheh? Why are you crying?" He said, "Ani bocheh, amash ani lo bocheh. I'm crying because I don't know why I'm not crying. I don't know why I'm not crying. I don't know on what to cry. I see everybody else crying. I see everybody else has this connection. I don't know what to cry about. That's why I'm crying." So again, this shows us the idea of mourning, the idea of the whole concept of mourning is for you to realize what you lost. Now we understand that with a loved one, and we understand that, God forbid, if someone, not to compare, God forbid, right, the death and financial loss, whatever it is, someone lost something, you lose something. There's different levels of mourning, different levels of pain and mourning. Of course, the highest level is losing a loved one. But you're mourning because of what you lost. And that's why the laws of mourning, right? There's many laws about the concept of you're supposed to speak about the loved one, right? People are supposed to comfort you, but in the way they're not really supposed to initiate conversation. You're supposed to initiate conversation because you're supposed to start. You're the one that's supposed to bring up the memories that you should remember what you lost. But the idea of mourning is that you should recognize that you lost something. said this Israeli soldier, I don't remember what I lost. I'm crying. I don't even know what I lost. I'm standing here at the wall. Everybody's so excited. What's the difference between this wall and another wall? You know, it reminds me of a joke that is said, not to put one next to another, but reminds me of a joke that said, you know, there's a group of tourists coming to the Kotel. You know, I lived in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of you know, right? And you always see tourists by the Kotel, right? And with their phone, it used to be with the, you know, the big cameras on over their neck. Now it's with all their selfie sticks, right? The times has changed, right? But you know, they're all there, and their tour guide. And one tour guide actually comes on Tisha B'Av, and they ask the tour guide, why is everybody sitting on the floor? Why are they crying? Like, what's going on over here? So he told him, oh, let me tell you the history of this. And he said, this used to be a magnificent building over here. It was a great temple. It was a great, unbelievable structure and a spiritual place for the Jewish people. And it was destroyed by fire. So they're mourning over it. They're crying over the destruction. So one guy turned to the other guy and says, I don't understand. They didn't have insurance. You know, so, you know, for some people, it's like, okay, it's insurance, you know, you get something, you know. But we understand, right, that there's something deeper behind there. Right? But this Israeli soldier said, I don't know why I'm not crying. So back to our initial start of the two statements, and then we're going to go a little more into what we're crying about, what we're mourning about, that allows us to start the rebuilding process. Now we understand a little better what it means by the statement of the Talmud and how the two things are contrasting each other. The statement in the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, that says that when every generation the temple is now rebuilt as if they destroyed it, doesn't mean to say, as we explained, that it's literally built. It means to say that they're not doing anything to rebuild it. They're not mourning over it. So by not mourning over it, by not knowing what you lost, it's as if it's gone. It's no existence. The whole concept of mourning is to remember what we're losing. So it keeps it alive. It keeps us with us. That's the second statement of the Talmud in the Babylonian Talmud that says whoever does mourn, whoever does misavel, will see in the rebuilding and the joy of it, because we're building it up, because everything has a cause and an effect. The cause of the destruction was for us to be able to mourn over it, to recognize what we lost, because during that time we moved away from it. You know, when you don't have something, you want it. But eventually, over time, we could forget. But the concept of mourning is to remind us, to constantly remind us what we forgot. So that is the effect of the destruction of the temple, and allows us to connect, to start rebuilding it. Because when we start mourning, what we're doing is we're putting those blocks slowly but surely one on top of the other, because we're reminding ourselves what we lost. We're building ourselves up, and God willing, we'll never be like that soldier that we say we don't know what we're crying about. So this is stage one of understanding in general what the concept of mourning is. But especially during these days that we're in the 3 weeks. We started the 3 weeks last week on Thursday with the beginning with the fast of Sivasha B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. And it concludes, climax with Tisha B'Av. So we're in this mourning period. Yes, so there's stages. Climbing to Tisha B'Av. But we have to understand what we're mourning about. What's the idea of mourning? So this is stage one of our conversation. And again, just a reminder for those that joined later, or if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to write it in the comment, right, either on Facebook, right, or on the chat in Zoom, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions if you write a question on either in the comments or on Zoom, on the chat. So that's stage one. Now, what we have to understand is, what are we mourning? And what does it mean that we have to know what we're mourning, right? So, and again, everything that you're mourning for, you have to know what that is. So I saw this beautiful piece from Rav Chaim Friedlander. And he says this beautiful idea. He says like this, he says that when the Jewish people came back, Now, imagine the scenario. Destruction of the temple 1. Right? First temple. Right? There's two, we mourn over 2 temples. So 70 years later, right? However you did the calculation, right? Haman mixed up the calculation. That's a firm story. Finally, 70 years later, from whenever it was 70 years, they finally come back to the land of Israel. And they're about to build the second temple. And they build the second temple. Says the Talmud, says it's a Talmud, I think it is, or it's a Midrash, I don't remember offhand, I apologize. Right? But says that there was 2 categories of people. It says the younger generation was all excited. Right? Oh my gosh, we're in Beis Hamikdash, we're going to go into the temple, we're going to be able to bring sacrifices. Right? Because they grew up in Babylon, they grew up in Bavel, they grew up in Persia. They didn't know about the temple, maybe when they were little kids, but most of them even when they weren't little kids, 70 years. They're all excited. And then he said you got the second category, the elders who remember the first temple, right? 70 years, so let's say they're 90 now, they're 20 years old, they can remember it. Very well, they can remember it. It says they were saddened. They didn't have as much of excitement. It says why? Because they remember the first temple. This first temple had great miracles. Fire came down from heaven, and other great miracles. There was the ark, and other great things that the second temple didn't have. So it says we have to realize that everything has its perspective of what we're coming from. So now let's think about where we're coming from. We're 2,000 years later, over 2,000 years later. What are we mourning about? How do we think about mourning? Right? And it's so ingrained in our prayer. We say Yerushalayim Ercha, right? We say Binyan Yerushalayim and our benching. We break a glass at a wedding. We're so entrenched in but it's actions that we're doing. How do we connect to it? Right? What do we even think of comprehending a mourning for something like this? How do we do it? We're like those youngers, right? People, and the younger people could be 50, right? They're still born in Persia, right? Because of 70-year exile, right? So there was like the second generation that came, and they were so excited because they didn't know about the first one. So he says like this, he says something very important. He says, therefore, it is incumbent upon us to learn and understand the deep concept of the destruction and to feel and understand how our situation has declined from the time of the destruction until now. So there's 2 ways of missing something. There's 2 ways of knowing that you're lacking something. Number 1 is how great it was. Right? How great it was, right? The unbelievable concept of the spirituality of it, right? The fire, the sacrifices, the spiritual idea, all the great things that there was, right? The spiritual levels that one could attain. But let's be realistic. That's a little beyond us right now. Right? And yes, it's important, and we'll talk about it probably at another time, right? And we'll delve into other ideas, but it's a little beyond us. And there's some that go ahead and learn, about the Talmud speaks about the miracles of the temple and the great joyous time they had in the temple, and the Simchas Beis Sheva that they had in the temple. And those are important things, and I'm not knocking it, God forbid. But it's still, even when we're learning that, still a little foreign to us. But you know what we could know? You know what we could understand? Is the suffering that we've had since the destruction of the temple. So, our human nature a lot of times is that we think things are good. We're doing okay right now, right? We're doing okay. Yeah, of course there's problems, and there's this problems, and there's Corona, right? And there's this, and there's that, and then the personal problems, but overall, right? what are some of the essential things of the keynotes? So Caroline, that's a great question. Caroline's asking a question from Facebook, and it's a great question. Oh, as I said in the introduction, we're gonna probably the last class is gonna go into more into the details of Tisha B'Av itself and some of the keynotes. But today's class is more of a general idea. So it's a great question. God willing, the last class, we're going to get into some of the ideas of the keynotes and some of the Tisha B'Av directly of the questions on Tisha B'Av, right? So let's hold off on that for the last class. The last class will be the Tuesday before Tisha B'Av, actually. So let's get back to our topic. So like this, right? So what we have to do, right, is we have to understand, right, the hardships that we have, right? We have to understand the hardships that we have, right? We have to understand. Let me take a step back. So we're talking about that, yes, we have all these hardships, right? But at the same time, right, unless there's a catastrophe of a Holocaust, right? Unless there's a catastrophe of a Holocaust, right? Or other things like that, which God willing, we should never have again, right? But overall, right, we think that we're cruising through life, we're okay. We're okay. We're okay, you know. This past Sunday, thank God, I spent time with the family, right? We're healthy, right? We have a roof over our head. Yeah, of course we want to live in Jerusalem, and of course we want Mashiach, and of course we're in Galus. But overall, we look at ourselves as we're okay. What the morning of Tisha B'Av and the 3 weeks is supposed to remind us is that we're not okay. We're not okay. We're cruising. We're walking with a limp. We're not okay. We don't have the temple. There's hardships, there's difficulties. There's hardships amongst our brethren. There's hardships from other cities. I just read today an article, right, from my country of where I grew up, right? Not my country, right? But Canada, one of the leaders, right, talking about how terrible the Jews are. It's an article. Read it. It's not going to affect. We're not okay. And Tisha B'Av and the morning is supposed to remind us that. Because we're supposed to reflect and say, look at all the hardship that's happened in the last 2,500 years. Look at the destruction, since the destruction of the temple, the Jewish people have been here and been there. And yes, there have been periods of times it's been okay. But all the pogroms, all the expulsions, all the deaths, we're grateful to Hashem that we're living in a time and a country that allows us, but we're not okay. And the only way to remind ourselves that we're not okay, God, I'm not saying we're bad. That's not what I'm saying. But we're all walking with a limp. And the only way to remind ourselves that is by mourning. Is by sitting on the ground on Tisha B'Av. Right? Is by through the 3 weeks, right? Not listening to music, right? Doing things that remind you of mourning, to change your schedule, and we'll talk about that again as we speak about more details in the next classes. But we have to remind ourselves that we're not okay. We're not okay. Now, one of the things that we have to focus on is that we can't repeat the mistake of the spies, right? What was the mistake of the spies? And I think I spoke about this idea in the morning minute, right? By Parsa Shlach, right? But if Shimon Schwab says that the spies saw one thing, right, which was totally different than what the purpose was, right? They saw giants, they saw funerals, right? And they thought it was a country, Eretz Yisrael was a country that was eating its people. It was abnormal things going on there, right? Excuse me. And they totally looked at the situation. Their glasses were totally fogged. They had dirt on their glasses. And Rav Simon Schwab says we cannot repeat the mistake of the spies. We have to clear our glasses. We have to look at the reality that we're in and say, we are not okay. We're walking with a limp. We're in exile. How many times a day do we think, and I'm talking to myself, trust me, I'm not perfect, far from it. How many times a day do we think, oh, we're in exile? Oh, we're in exile. We're not in exile. Come on, I have a house. I own my house. I paid off my mortgage, right? I own 3 cars, right? I even have a timeshare. I have a lake house, right? I own an airplane, right? Whatever it is. I'm in exile. Not me. Oh, yeah, Mashiach. Yeah, Eretz Yisrael. Of course, spiritual. Yeah, of course, we're in exile. How many times a day do we think about it? How often do we think about it? That is what Rabbi Yisachar Fran is quoting from the Rabbi Schwab, and that's what Chaim Freeland is trying to point out to us. That the mourning process in this period of time, we can't think about it all year round. Big tzaddik can do. Right? Some people wake up every night at Chatzos. Right? Some people don't go to sleep before Chatzos, but whatever. Right? Some people wake up and they say Tikkun Chatzos. They mourn about the destruction of the temple. But us normal people, not normal, us regular people, everybody's normal. Us regular people, how often do we think about it throughout the year? It's hard. It's hard. But the 3 weeks, this period of time is supposed to awaken us. Every section of the calendar, every time has its own avoda. We spoke about this many times. Has its own service, has its own purpose. This period of time that we're in the purpose of this time is for us to reflect and to remind ourselves that we're in exile. And we do that through mourning. We do that through reminding of what we're missing, what we lost. We do that through reminding ourselves and realizing what we lost. And as we said, yes, you should read about the greatness of the temple and the spirituality of the temple, and those are important things, and we'll touch upon some of those things, God willing, in the later classes. But I think something that's more practical for us is to realize what we lost in the sense of so many the tragedies that have happened. I think that's something that we could relate to more. Who hasn't had a tragedy in their life? Who doesn't know someone that had a tragedy in their life? Who hasn't, every time, thank God, there hasn't been bus bombings in a long time, and it shouldn't. But every time there's a bus bombing, cringe and say, oh, did I know someone or not? And that's just in the last couple of years. But that's something that we could relate to. That's something that we could reflect on. You know, there's this idea that someone was saying that, really, Rabbi, we need to have Tisha B'Av now. We have Israel. We have Jerusalem. And look, there's peace in between Egypt and Israel, right? We have our own land. We're prosperous. We're now we have more, Fortune 500 companies on the stock market. We're doing great. We're advanced in medical and all the different advances, and it's great. Look, what are we mourning for? And he looked at him and he said, there's no tsaras. There's no stabbings. There's no shootings. There's no bombings. Really? There's no threat from Iran, from other countries. No threat to Jews all over the world, even here in America. The anti-Semitism that's going on. There's no threat? You have no threat to us? Really? There's nothing to mourn about? We're thankful to God that allows us the beginning of the redemption, that we have the land of Israel. We're able to go there and pray at the kotel and understand, try to understand a little bit what we're missing. But you're telling me that that's it, that we're not in exile anymore? You're telling me everything's fine, everything's great? No suffering anymore? And friends, that's what we have to reflect on. As we started off the class, Kol Mis'avo Yerushalayim, whoever mourns over the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem will see it's rebuilt and see its joyous time, and whoever doesn't, and if the temple is not rebuilt in your times, it's as if you destroyed it. My friends, this is what it means. But not understanding what we're missing, but not mourning over it, but not realizing that the mourning itself is the rebuilding. By recognizing what we're missing, it's the rebuilding of the temple. That's its purpose, for us to recognize and to continue living within the temple through the mourning. As we quoted Napoleon, said such a people, of course, eventually will be back in their homeland. Because there's no other nation in the world that remembers and mourns something that happened a couple hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago. Because it's part of who we are, and that's why it's in our prayer. That's why we break a class by a wedding. Because it's part and parcel of who we are. We have to remember that we're limping, not to forget that we're limping. It's a reminder. It's a connection to who we truly are. That's what mourning's about. Wherever you are, mourning for the temple, which we're talking about now, mourning for a loved one, it's connecting you to them, making a part and parcel of you with them. So let's reconnect and try to remember, as we said, not to be like the spies. Make sure that our glasses are not fogged. Make sure that we're not have dirty glasses, and realize that we are in exile. We're limping. We might be limping in a fancy car and a big house, but we're limping because that's not all it. There's more to life. There's more to the Jewish people. And that's the idea of this period of time in the morning. And that's why mourning is rebuilding. By mourning, by connecting, by recognizing what we lost, by recognizing what's happening to us through the destruction, then we'll start refocusing our lives, reflecting and saying, how could we start rebuilding it? How can we get back to where we were? So checking our deeds, making sure that we're nice to our fellow person, making sure that our relationship with Hashem, with God, is being strengthened. By mourning, by recognizing what you lost, it allows you to start the process of fixing that limp. Mourning is rebuilding. So my blessing to all of us, and God willing, we'll continue in the next two classes. We'll go more into details, right? Next class more in the 3 weeks, and some of the things that transpired, and lessons from those things directly to things that we have to work on. And then the last class, it's a 3-part series. The last class, God willing, we'll talk more about Tisha B'Av directly, learn some stuff from the Kinos, some stuff from the Kinos. We have, thank God, in Eitzchaim, we have a great Kinos program, right? And, this year we'll have it also. We talk about the Kinos, but we'll talk about it in the class, and lessons from Tisha B'Av and how we're supposed to connect to these ideas more in detail. But today was more of an overview to remind us and to awaken us. And I'm talking to myself, we are limping. We have to realize that. So my blessing to all of us, so that we clear our glasses and we recognize where we truly are. Be grateful to Hashem that we're able to own our homes and live with prosperity. But at the same time, not forget that we're still limping. Wishing everybody a wonderful night. Thank you for joining.